assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It's Bigfoot Collectors Club with Bryce and Michael. I know a ghost story or two. Let's do this.
Welcome, everyone, to the 3rd annual 4th of July Bigfoot Collectors Club special. I am, of course, your barbecue chef, Michael McMillan, and with me always is Pyromancer.
Bryce Johnson.
And typically with us is DJ Riley Bray, but unfortunately, he's going to have to mix this episode after we record. He's stuck on the highway and can't make it to the barbecue in time, and we are sad that he's not here celebrating with us. But every year we celebrate the Independence Day with strange stories involving U.S. presidents, and this year will be no different, even if it is a little bit of a break from past tradition. We have an amazing guest with us here, but more on him in a moment. Our season-long event, Wet Hot Alien Summer, continues this week. We're covering all things UFO and alien-related here on BCC and our Patreon feed, The Other Side. Available right now on The Other Side is our latest release, a Bigfoot Book Club episode, a discussion of Jacques Vallée's seminal work, Passport to Magonia, where he discusses the possibility that aliens, fairies, and demons might all be the same thing.
All one and the same thing.
Right?
How
and
can
that
you
was
resist that?
I got to say, Bryce, we just recorded that episode a couple days ago, and that book kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, it's such a great read, and I mean, yeah, if you're going to read any of Jacques Vallée's work, I mean, that's the perfect place to start. And it's a great way to start thinking about these anomalous phenomena from a different perspective than usual.
It also made me feel like we've been right this whole time.
Well, that's what it's really about, right? It's like validating us. I mean, we're vindicated. Yeah, we're on to something. We're figuring it all out.
Yeah, we got this. So if you want to head over to patreon.com/Bigfoot Collectors Club and support the show for $5 a month, you can unlock that episode and so many more bonus shows every month. Okay. All right. Come on. Let's pull up a lawn chair, grab an icy beverage from your cooler. I'm throwing some dogs on the grill, veggie dogs for Mr. Bryce.
Veggie dog on there for me.
Guest, we haven't introduced yet. Are you a vegetarian or vegan?
No.
Okay, great. So I'll throw on a little brat for you as well. Let's get this part. Fantastic. Let's get this party started. Our guest today has actually made a movie about some high strangeness involving the presidents, actually, that we're going to be highlighting today. And we'll be talking all about that film in the second half of the show. Oh boy, is it tailor-made for this audience, guys.
I mean, seriously.
It's fucking awesome. Bryce, would you like to introduce our party guest?
I would love to. Cinema historian Jonathan Rosenbaum called our next guest one of America's most
This party
gifted.
got very formal.
Well, come on. One of America's most gifted independent filmmakers. He's a past Guggenheim Fellow, recipient of the Wolfgang Stout Prize, and winner of 2 Independent Spirit Awards. He's the writer and director of Letters from the Big Man, a thoughtfully executed movie about a woman's unlikely friendship with a Sasquatch that was a New York Times critic pick. But believe it or not, that's not what he's here to talk about right now. He's here to talk about his just-released film, The 11th Green, also a New York Times critic's pick, about a respected journalist who uncovers the truth behind the mythology of President Eisenhower's long alleged involvement in extraterrestrial events, and a film Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times recently bragged, if high enough, you'll like Ike talking aliens with Obama look-alike. Please give a warm welcome to my friend and filmmaker, Christopher Munch.
Thank you so much, Bryce. It's really a pleasure to be here with you guys. I enjoy your show a lot.
I'll tell you what, I was pretty high when I watched that movie last night. I'm not gonna lie. And there were moments where I was just like, whoa. I was like, I can't believe somebody made this into a movie.
Isn't that amazing? I know. I wish I still smoked weed, but man.
I felt like, and we're going to talk about this in the later half of the show, but I felt like I literally took a trip to some beautiful alternate dimension, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
That's a really nice response. I wish everybody would respond that way. So I'm encouraged going forward here.
Fantastic.
I mean, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. It really is sort of a journey. You sort of buckle in, and I mean, because like Mike said earlier, we're talking about this stuff all the time, and for somebody to make an earnest film about the subject, you're like, whoa, okay, let me sit down and see what's going on here.
Before we get into Chris, your personal paranormal history, we actually have some pressing
BCC news. You destroyed that. It's like you went slower on purpose.
I thought it's because I thought we said 3 C's. All right, here we go. This is a headline from CBS News. Senators want public to see Pentagon UFO reports, citing inconsistent information sharing. Did you guys see this report from this past week? Chris, did you check out are you familiar with the story?
I'm a little familiar with it, yes, although I didn't see the thing that you're referring to exactly.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to read it to you directly. This is from CBS News. There's no author byline, but here we go. The Senate Intelligence Committee is aiming to regulate a Pentagon UFO program so that the public is better informed of its activities and the country's intelligence branches can more easily share information. The panel said Tuesday that it supports the efforts of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, quote unquote, officially confirming the program's continued existence. That's a highlight in a provision to the annual intelligence authorization bill. The Senate's focus on the program stems less out of a concern over extraterrestrials and more from the threat posed by real-world U.S. adversaries such as China. The program, managed by the Office of Naval Intelligence, is responsible for, quote-unquote, collection and reporting on unidentified aerial phenomenon, any links they have to adversarial foreign governments, and the threat they pose to U.S. military assets and installations. The U.S. is particularly worried about China's espionage capabilities, including use of drones and other aerial technology. While recognizing that the topic is sensitive, the senators said that the previous information sharing and coordination across the intelligence community has been inconsistent and called for a detailed and public report on the program's progress as well as any phenomena it observes. The provision is part of the 2021 Intelligence Authorization Bill, or 2021, which is yet to make its way to the full Senate. If it passes, the Pentagon will have 180 days to submit a report to Congress. That's almost the amount of time that I've spent in my apartment since the coronavirus pandemic.
You could be compiling your own report, Michael.
I think I am. It's about how many dust bunny babies I've made under my bed. So there you go. Now Congress is like, let's see these reports. What does this mean? What do you guys think this means for disclosure and ufology in general?
Well, I think it's good that some politicians are not afraid to go there, as it were, and I think it's I think it's all sort of a piece with the trend that we've been seeing, where there's more discussion of this publicly, and I think more and more people in elected office maybe are getting the sense that it's okay not to be completely mum on the subject, and that it isn't necessarily a threat to their political careers the way it was once considered to be, I think.
It almost feels like they found their backdoor way in now that the Pentagon has come out and said, yeah, these are real videos. We're referring to, of course, the videos from 2017 that came out in that New York Times report. Now that the Pentagon has said, yeah, they're real, now it gives room for Congress to go, okay, we're not going to say that they're aliens because we can't. And honestly, good on them. We shouldn't be jumping to that conclusion, right? I mean, I think we know that there's something strange happening, but they can hide behind the foreign threat concern.
They seem to like couch it in terms of like Chinese drones, which it most certainly is not, so
Exactly.
it's like they're kind of like, well, taking a half step, which is great,
But that is just the mask that they can put in order to put funding towards studying this further, and then also getting some of this information out there. You know what I mean? Because more at some point it's going to come across. It'll come along that it's not Chinese drones. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's baby steps. It's good. It's good. I think this is exciting stuff, and the confirmation that they're continuing to still study these UAPs, even though that program was quote unquote shut down. I've said quote unquote 3 times now, so I'm retiring that phrase for the episode.
Luis Elizondo always said that he believed when he left the ATIP program that it was still going on. Some interesting word phraseology that caught my attention was UFO task force, or did UAP task force. So I'm not sure who or what that involves, but that's interesting verbiage. And obviously the program has been going on. It never really stopped, according to Lou Elizondo. So it's really just about where they're allocating the money left over from the program and where that's going, because we now know that a lot of that money sort of went to Bigelow Aerospace and his program over at NIDS studying Skinwalker Ranch, So it'll be interesting to see where some of this program money gets spent.
Definitely, and to what degree the findings are shared publicly. So much. What we need so much, I think, is transparency when it comes to open research on this, since there presumably has been so much secretive research done over time, and that's certainly the conception that the public has of the whole thing. I think that to whatever degree new research is able to be transparent and accessible to the public will go a long way towards increasing the organic readiness of people to hear the information.
Totally. Well, and in speaking of organic readiness, I mean, do you think that this or has anything to do with, or I should say, in vice versa, does Space Force, our new Space Force, have anything to do with what's been taking place in this sort of latest news spillings of UAP phenomena that's taken place over the last 3 years? I mean, is this why we developed our Space Force, you think, or?
I wouldn't know, but I mean, there has always existed the rivalry between Air Force's Space Command and the civilian space agency, NASA. And now that, the civilian space agency has ceded a lot of the things that it was once responsible for to private industry, I don't know. I don't know what to say about the Space Force.
To me, Space Force just feels like, and look, this is just my opinion, it seems like a PR stunt to me. That just seems to me like a way that our current administration is going, hey, look, we're doing something fucking cool. You know what I mean? And just trying to like do a little dick waving because of the fear, that we all have that like, the U.S. is not going to be and isn't the major world power that it used to be. You know what I mean? So I feel like that Space Force shit is just complete G.I. Joe fanfic PR.
Yeah, it's almost
stuff.
like Reagan's Operation Star Wars, where, his plan was to laser shoot down nuclear warheads. Well, it never really came to fruition, but on paper, it was like, yeah, fuck yeah, Operation Star Wars,
I really have to say that I think this administration in particular couldn't care less about alien or extraterrestrial life. I really think that, but that's just my opinion. We got a lot of problems here anyway that we need to figure out first, and they're not doing such a great job of that. Okay, Chris, let's talk to you about your personal paranormal history. I'm very excited to hear about how you got into this world, because based on The 11th Green and your previous film, Letters from the Big Man, which I both just fucking mainlined over the past 24 hours, you clearly have got your thumb on the pulse of high strangeness. I'm guessing you must have spent some part of your youth just listening to hours of Coast to Coast, I assume. I'm very interested in how you got into this topic, and then if you've ever experienced anything strange.
Right, sure. Well, I guess I should say going into it that I don't have an overarching interest in making films about paranormal subjects or anything like that. I'm not approaching it, from that standpoint. But as far as the Sasquatch phenomenon, my sort of entry into that was a fairly organic process, I think. And it took a number of years, actually. Well, to back up, I mean, I started making films when I was a kid in the 70s. Travel logs, hang glider movies, surfing type films.
Hang glider movies? What's a hang glider movie? That sounds
a movie about hang gliders, man.
Is there a camera mounted on the hang glider, or are you looking at hang gliders?
I wasn't that sophisticated. I just happened to live near a glider port.
You didn't build a primordial GoPro?
No, not at all. Although I probably could have, because I was filming in Super 8 and the equipment was so small then. But I started out doing that. Some of my quote unquote student work, although that doesn't really do justice to students, wound up on a student film festival that was broadcast on the local PBS affiliate. And I wound up working for that PBS affiliate while I was still in high school. And that taught me a lot about just the mechanics of film production, because everything was still done on film at that time. All the locally produced current affairs documentaries and all of the for hire work that the station did for visiting BBC crews and that sort of thing. So I did that. I didn't go to college. When I was 18, I wrote a feature film script that I spent a number of years making, actually. And that was the sort of thing where it was so bad that I kept cutting stuff out of it until there was nothing left, essentially. And it never saw the light of day. And then I did another one like that a few years later that actually was finished, but it too, fortunately, didn't see the light of day beyond one showing at the independent feature market in New York. So after that, I made another small film. It actually was only an hour in length, so that's why I'm calling it small, in Spain, called The Hours and Times, and that one actually did come out. And after that, I made another 5 or so features. But as far as experiences from my own history that might have caused me to want to deal with anomalous subjects, I can't say that I really had any, but I was interested. I did read some of the classic books in ufology. I think my mother was a member of some sort of paranormal book club because we had a couple of cases that were, and this was all good stuff. It wasn't, it wasn't bad stuff, but I had a chance to sample some of that material, I think. I do remember The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller because, she had been so taken aback by the story. And
of course, that's Betty and Barney, the first book about Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah, exactly. And which I reread many years later, before I started making The 11th Green, but still many years later. And what was interesting at that time is that I had seen the re-release of John Huston's film Let There Be Light, and in it depicted the same psychiatrist who was Betty and Barney Hill's psychiatrist at work at Walter Reed Hospital, helping soldiers who had been shell-shocked during the Second World War. And it was actually documentary footage. It was really quite amazing to see him at work. So that also interested me. And I saw the television movie that was made with Estelle Parsons and James Earl Jones and Barnard Hughes, which I thought was very good. So as far as personal experiences, though, I can't say that I, really had any. Although around, 2005, I kind of backed into the subject of Sasquatch. Again, something I knew absolutely nothing about. And started writing a screenplay. And what got me into it actually was very innocuous. It was just a gift from a friend of a humorous book. I think it was called Me Write Book or something like that. One of these, popularizations of what a Sasquatch might write if he were writing.
I think I remember that book actually.
Exactly.
Was it like a children's book, sort of? Did it have like illustrations of a Sasquatch in it?
Yeah, there was some nice artwork. It was actually probably more of a hipster book than a children's book, but that for some reason came my way. And at the same time, there was a catastrophic wildfire that had occurred in Southern Oregon and Northern California, which interested me a lot because it sort of focused a growing politicization that was taking place in the Forest Service at the time, in the direction of salvage logging of lands that were burnt in this great fire, in a very ancient, interesting wilderness called the Kalmiopsis Wilderness. So I wound up spending a lot of time there, and I read a book by David Rains Wallace called The Klamath Knot, K-N-O-T, which dealt with his perspective as a naturalist and backpacker in this particular region, and his thoughts about Sasquatch, which were not of, somebody with a particular orientation towards paranormal things. So I worked on this script for a period of years, and during that time, I met some very interesting people who had a lot of experiences themselves with Sasquatch, more in the kind of mystical and psychic end of things, I suppose. And I became good friends with a woman in Oregon named Kathleen Jones at the time. She later was known as Kathleen Odom. And she was a very gifted channel, a very gifted trance channel who had a near-death experience. And prior to that, she, was a professional woman, very smart, well-educated woman. And after that, she was still smart and well-educated, but she also had this particular aptitude for channeling the words of Sasquatch and in a kind of collective form rather than an individual form. And
that's incredible. I was just going to say, can you tell us what a trans channel is?
Well, let's see. Generally speaking, it's somebody who goes into trance, some sort of a trance, whether it's especially deep or more shallow, and blends with an entity that's not physiologically incarnate and is in the form of a sort of guide or gatekeeper or what have you, and facilitates a certain type of communication from non-physical consciousness. And I guess nowadays there's more tendency to draw a distinction between channels and mediums. I think in the olden days there wasn't that much of a distinction, and channels were also generically known as mediums. But now, having known quite a few channels and mediums, I think there is more of a distinction, or some people are more capable in one area than the other. In any case, Kathleen was very capable as far as channeling Sasquatch and also as a domestic animal communicator. So there was an opportunity to sort of gauge her efficacy by the work that she did with domestic animals,
Right.
you know, and whether her observations proved to be valid in the field, so to speak. And so she and I became good friends. And after I made Letters from the Big Man, we actually collaborated on a webcast over the course of several years that was strictly devoted to channeled communication, but it kind of expanded to include our discussing other individuals who were having these experiences at close range, who were, you know, often longtime residents of a particular place that was also occupied by a particular Sasquatch. And over a period of time, a period of seeming trust would arise, and they would have some very interesting interactions. And some of these people have written books. People like Lisa Scheel, who I think her first book was called Backyard Bigfoot, and then she later moved to Michigan. And Lori and Dustin Chandler in Georgia have had some really interesting experiences. Again, a situation where they had been in this particular location for a long period of time, and their interactions were almost in the manner of tutelage and a particular course of study, almost, you could say, that was being offered up to them by the Sasquatch in the form of these mysteries and in the form sometimes of frightening experiences. But usually once they got past that level of it and opened to the reality of what was happening, the learning kind of, you know, made an exponential leap, and they were able to glean a lot for it. So in any case, I'm digressing a bit, but it really my interest in Sasquatch came about very organically and not, you know, a priori as a result of an interest in something very unusual. Although when I was young, obviously, like a lot of people, I watched In Search of, the old Alan Landsberg series with Leonard Nimoy, and I had watched a film in the 70s that was made in British Columbia, all on location. It was very good. It was released theatrically. It was at the time when this company Schick Sun Classic Pictures was putting out these sort of documentary reenactments theatrically and four-walling theaters, and people would go and see it. In any case, so I guess I knew that there was a phenomenon that existed, and I think I always presumed that it was a legitimate one, although I had no real firsthand basis for assuming that. So the journey of Letters from the Big Man, making it over 6 or 7 years, really deepened my understanding, and then proceeding from that into the webcast that we made over the subsequent several years also continued to deepen my understanding.
I mean, it's a subject that just keeps pulling you in. It seems like your experience is similar to mine. Is like, you know, once you sort of start to inquire about these things, it really opens you up, for lack of a better term, into, like, you know, all the stuff that's taking place with these Sasquatch, and, you know, the habituations that you were talking about earlier. It's absolutely fascinating subject that never ceases to get old or bore me, to say the least.
Yeah, no, I think that's very correct. And I think to the degree that an individual sort of approaches this from the standpoint of personal growth, you know, and how does this impact my personal growth, and you know, opening on a kind of heart level to the phenomenon really makes it possible to have a higher degree of engagement with it than simply sort of standing back and trying to observe it on an empirical level.
So, Chris, my question for you is that as a child of the 70s, I feel like Bigfoot was like a pretty popular figure in pop culture. Do you have memories of that, or were you too young to kind of be aware of big, you know, like on the $6 Million Man? And, you know, I just feel like he had a real heyday in the 70s.
No, I think that's very true. As I say, it was certainly on my radar, but I never really thought that much about it, apart from watching In Search of, and in part from seeing Sasquatch 77 or whatever that movie was called, that was rather intriguing. But I did, you know, in hindsight, I think I did feel some sort of deep atavistic connection to Sasquatch for whatever reason. And at that time, I hadn't really spent a lot of time in the forest, certainly not, you know, in the remote wilderness. That came much later. So, but yes, it was certainly part of part of the era, and but I really hadn't done a lot of reading on that subject, and I should say that Sasquatch was not a part of my mother's paranormal book club for whatever reason. She might have opted out of the Sasquatch section of it.
If anyone had told her that it was possible that Sasquatch came out of UFOs, she might be into it.
No, she was more discerning than that. I mean, which isn't to say that there isn't an association, but on paper.
I'm sorry. I've just watched 2 of your movies, and I'm shocked that you are poo-pooing that idea.
I'm not poo-pooing it. In fact, I just watched a film recently that came out in which my friend Tom Powell is involved, and he went to visit the Owl Moon Lab in Oregon, and that portion of the film actually struck me as most true, because a lot of the acoustical anomalies that they were reporting from that situation coincided very closely with some of the acoustical anomalies that I would experience when I was making Letters from the Big Man.
Wild.
So UFOs. Let's talk about UFOs. Where were they on your radar growing up, and how did you decide? And we'll get more in depth into the movie itself in a little bit of the second half of the show. But how did you get introduced to the UFO phenomenon, other than your mom having a couple books on it? Because you seem like real into this shit based on that movie, and maybe that's just good research. But I'm just shocked that you're like kind of a normal guy who made 2 very deep cut movies.
There's something you're not telling us here.
Yeah, exactly. Who are you working for, Chris? What do you know?
Seriously, I don't. I'm not Bob Emenegger.
I don't even know who Bob Emenegger is.
You were just talking about him on one of your previous shows.
Yeah,
on one of your previous.
He was that filmmaker, Michael, who was supposed to get the UFO footage at Holloman Base, right? He did the film
right. Yes.
UFOs Past, Present, and did I get Past, Present, and Future?
Right.
But the Defense Department never gave him the holy grail of his film that they were supposedly going to give him. They balked at the last second giving him.
Listen, I don't remember anything prior to March 14th, 2020, when I went into this bunker and never came out. Okay, I don't remember.
Well, that film of Emenegger is actually very good. I wish that there were a good edition of it available now, because really I've only seen it as a bad YouTube copy, but it actually had some really beautiful illustrations in place of the footage that he was supposed to have received.
Yeah.
Right. He was a Hollywood filmmaker, right? I mean, he was sort of a big budget producer and filmmaker, and when he was tasked with this, he was sort of like, why me?
Yeah, who's to say? But I mean, obviously, certain filmmakers have had ties to the IC over the years, and there are people that you go to, I guess, if you need this stuff.
But tell us back to your UFO sort of where it started from you, and even if that sort of co-connects with you filming the 11th Green, tell us about that.
Yeah, after I made Letters from the Big Man, and concurrently with the webcast that I was making with my channel associate, Kathleen, I did a short film for ITVS that was the story of an outcast inventor living in a remote part of the southern Oregon coast who experiences an event similar to the tsunami of 1964 that pummeled Crescent City. And he happens to have been an outcast inventor who was working in breakthrough energy and propulsion at MIT and was shut down. So I had become very interested in that topic, and coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, I found out that I was at the time staying a couple of doors away from the place where John Hutchinson had moved to after he was living in Vancouver, and he had built some sort of interferometer that was supposed to repel incoming radiation from Fukushima. This was in the aftermath of that nuclear disaster. But in any case, so I made this short, and I had done a fair amount of reading in the field of so-called, breakthrough or free energy, and I guess that was my entry point into the topic of UFOs and the national security state, and the idea that there did exist exotic technology within special access programs, and that some of this at least might have had its origins in crashed objects. And it fascinated me that that a number of really talented inventors over the years, over nearly the entire 20th century, had come up with some very interesting devices, and they had this relationship with whomsoever, the clandestine organization or the oil, the oil.
The monopoly man.
Whoever.
We know he's behind all of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's 1932.
Yeah. The backroom boys, as you called them in
the
your
backroom
film,
boys, or Royal Dutch Shell, or whatever. Well, Royal Dutch Shell used to sponsor the Shell Mileage-a-thon in the 50s and 60s, where they would hold a competition for these highly fuel-efficient devices and breakthrough inventions, which they would then promptly, buy
Steal.
up and shelve.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And if you didn't acquiesce, they escalated their overtures over a period of time until it was something you couldn't resist. So yeah, I read a lot of that stuff. I read a lot of Tom Bearden's work, which I know is controversial, but he's a very diligent researcher, and he's very good at sort of uncovering papers that were written in the 1930s dealing with some exotic device or the other. And so when I started to make the 11th Green, one thing that had intrigued me was the urban legend that existed regarding the possibility that around 2008, Boeing Aircraft Corporation had sought to migrate a black world technology into commercial aviation. And this had been written about by a fellow named Paul Laviolette, the physicist Paul Laviolette, who wrote a book called Subquantum Kinetics, but who also wrote a book called Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, which is kind of an unfortunate title if you're trying to, have credibility with the scientific establishment.
Right.
But it actually is a very well-written book, extremely well-written and illustrated book, in which he speaks about a number of things, including, the hypothetical Boeing migration, as well as, the alleged incorporation of various exotic technology into the B-2 Spirit bomber. And he, in fact, went so far as to effectively back engineer how this might work. But he also talked about a lot of other aspects of exotic propulsion, like experiments in microwave levitation out at Rocketdyne in Simi Valley and places like that.
I'll tell you what, I've experienced some exotic propulsion in Burbank, California, if you know what I mean.
I don't know what you mean.
Okay.
I was going to ask, Chris, do a lot of these outlier inventors, did they ever sort of lay claim to sort of where they were getting some of these ideas, or were these just really super smart guys who were thinking outside the box? I mean, I guess what I'm driving at is guys like John Hutchison never claimed to sort of, channel alien material that gave them the blueprints to help them build this stuff, right? I mean,
well, John actually did talk about how he would get downloads, and
oh, wow.
he would get
from aliens.
Well, I don't know that he gave name and address to,
like, downloads in his brain, not computer.
Yeah, no,
okay.
Yeah, definitely they were. Yeah,
listen,
they were.
I gotta tell you guys, we got a full red nerd alert happening right now. So I'm just trying to let our audience know what exactly you guys are going on about.
No, yeah. Downloads, getting information from somewhere that's outside privy to your knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and certainly Nikola Tesla said as much, that he, his contacts ranged far and wide in the etheric realms. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think it's absolutely true that some of these people were receiving downloads. I mean, certainly Van Tassel, his plans were in that form. I mean, I don't believe he physiologically met with Venusians in Landers, and I don't mean to be laughing because I'm dismissing him, but I think that probably the information that came to him was in a more metaphysical realm than
wow.
It's kind of like, actors are the same way. Like when I shot my IHOP commercial, I don't know where that performance came from. It just sort of, I channeled it. That's all I know.
Chris.
Go on. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of writers work intuitively that way anyway, without realizing that they're, being guided or accessing information. I mean, some obviously are more formal about the way they write stuff. I mean, I had always, felt that certain types of mediumistic communication, like the Seth material, I held in a fairly high regard. I had been very familiar with that. And later in my life, Rob Butts, who was the husband of Jane Roberts, who produced the Seth material, was a friend of mine. And I had a very high regard for that. And for the raw material as well, which is interesting from the standpoint of ufology and the history of ufology, because it does cover some of that ground. And the group that produced it was a really interesting group of three people. But on the other hand, I mean, I come from a family of scientists. I mean, my father who just passed away, was an astronomer and astrophysicist, at Caltech during the 60s, and was involved in the space program. And he was a principal investigator of the infrared radiometer on Pioneer. So I probably inherited some of my interest in imaging from him, and certainly an interest in problem solving, which has served me very well. So I suppose my makeup is a combination of things, really.
Did he ever mention those taboo 3 letters UFO?
Not really. I didn't have a conversation, but interestingly, later in his life, when his memory was not so good, but after I had started work on the 11th Green, I was very interested in some of the people he knew, because he certainly knew a lot of these guys, and one of the people he knew was one of the alleged fellows, one of the alleged old boys who was involved in all this saucer business after the war, the Harvard astronomer Donald Menzel. Who was, in Office of Naval Intelligence. And my father met him during the war when he had come to Mexico, along with a number of other very distinguished astronomers, to open a new observatory there. And then my father later knew him in Boston and would see him when Donald came to Pasadena. But he knew nothing of his secret work. I mean, I asked him very specifically about that, and he knew nothing of Menzel's alleged secret work for the clandestine organization. So, but as far as talking about UFOs with my father, no, I think he had concluded, though, that there was not a secret space program. I think he had considered that whether the Air Force had been conducting something like that, as has been suggested by some writers. But in any case,
wow,
yeah,
that's wild.
I still don't know where I stand on that. Isn't that crazy? I mean. Yeah, I was just going to say, I still don't know where I stand on the secret space program. I think I align with some of your fathers, but I don't think it's happened. But then you have some great sort of guys like, historian and ufologist Richard Dolan, who's pretty convinced that there is some sort of a secret space program. So I don't know which basket I've laid my eggs in yet. Now, Chris, you said you had sort of a personal paranormal story of what do you call it, the B-2 bomber in Echo Park. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, yeah, I'm embarrassed even to say it, but I was working at a friend's house in Echo Park editing a movie about 20 years ago, and it had a really wonderful view. And I was just looking out one day, and this triangular aerial object was kind of floating outside, and the perspective that I had on it was sort of looking down on it. And for some reason at the time, this is the aspect that was very interesting to me. I didn't think twice about it. I didn't think to question it. And I think in the back of my mind, I simply thought, oh yeah, it's just a B-2 bomber in Echo Park, hovering.
Not that it couldn't be, but
and then
I don't know about the hovering, but
yeah, exactly. And it was only years later that I thought about that and thought to myself, well, Jesus, that's impossible. That couldn't have been a B-2 bomber hovering. So, I mean, I'm quite convinced that it wasn't something that was kind of normally visible, but it does seem as if I may have and this is with the benefit of hindsight, but I think I may have been seeing into another another layer of the fabric of many thicknesses, as the Sasquatch call it. Something that might have been impinging here from some other dimensional realm. But
when did that click in your brain? Do you remember?
It clicked in my brain only after I was deeply immersed in the literature of ufology and exopolitics and clandestine aerospace programs.
I mean, because maybe they go hand in hand more than you think. I mean, it's so strange. It's so strange that, you would sort of witness something like that. I don't know. I always like to make more of these than what's there. But there seems to be some sort of purpose behind who gets to see what. I don't know.
Well, and it does, to me anyway, it seems to underscore the idea that sometimes people will have these experiences and they won't necessarily understand them at first, but later they'll acquire a different significance, or, in some cases, I think people's memories they have screen memories or whatever you want to call it, and they don't recall something until it's the right time to do so, and until whatever development of the personality and whatever development has taken place that would make it valuable or relevant to understand the experience more deeply. And I think you hear that in some of the more credible people talking about so-called abduction experiences, and women in particular who allegedly have been impregnated, and how some of those screen memories fall away, not through hypnosis, but just through a more natural process of their somehow assimilating on some level the knowledge of these events, and are able to kind of deal with them in an outer way, or at a conscious level, able to deal with them at a conscious level, whereas formerly they weren't.
Yeah, it's wild.
I mean, as far as I know, I've never gotten anyone pregnant, but I am at the age where I might have an 18-year-old son or daughter show up on my doorstep any minute now. If you're listening, please give me a heads up. Chris, we're beating around the bush. We got to talk about this movie and the story of high strangeness that inspired it. But before we do that, we have a party game that we like to play with all of our guests, especially on the 4th of July. I'm going to go down a list of phenomenon, and you're going to tell me if you're open to it, you're going to say believe it. If you're not, you're going to say bullshit.
I'm sure I'm open to all of it, but I probably have no personal experience with any of it.
That's fine. You haven't heard the list yet.
Believe it.
This is a game that we like to call bullshit
or believe it.
That's right. All right, Chris, on your mark.
I should okay.
What you got? Is there a disclaimer at the top?
Yeah, there's a disclaimer. Just that there are places of geophysical anomalies that exist on this planet, and if you happen to be there, you will sometimes experience some highly unusual phenomena passing through. But it doesn't mean that every person on the street is necessarily going to encounter them.
You know what? You still got to face the list, brother. Here we go. On your mark.
Quit squirming.
Yeah. Ghosts.
Yes.
Believe it. You got to say believe it or bullshit. I yell at all my guests.
Okay, believe it.
UFOs.
Believe it.
Bigfoot.
Believe it.
Alien greys.
Believe it.
Out-of-body experiences.
Believe it.
Demonic possession.
Believe it for some people.
The Bermuda Triangle.
Believe it.
Alien abductions.
Believe it.
Loch Ness Monster.
Believe it.
Time travel.
Believe it.
Mothman.
Don't know anything about Mothman.
You got to pick one. I don't care if you've heard of him or not. You need to choose right now. Where do you stand?
I'm sure there's some basis of validity to it, yes.
Reincarnation.
Yes. Believe.
ESP.
Yes.
Haunted houses.
Yes.
The Illuminati.
Well, can I pass on any of these?
No, you may not, Chris. The Illuminati told me you may not.
This is not paranormal.
Bullshit or believe it. The Illuminati.
I have to pass. I can't.
Oh boy, you know something, don't you? It's true. It's not totally paranormal, but people sometimes the Illuminati are involved with aliens. So.
They're blamed for everything.
Yes, there's a face on Mars.
I really don't know that much about that phenomenon. I've heard so much, but I don't personally have a belief in it. No.
Chris, you're too smart for this game. I need you to lower it a little bit. Skunk Ape.
Yes. Believe.
Believe it.
Yes.
Heaven. Oh boy, heaven.
That's a misleading word. I mean, I certainly believe in the continuity of consciousness after physical death. And
Chris, this is a rapid fire game. Bullshit or believe it, brother.
Not in the sort of pastoral form that it's generally painted to be.
Hell.
Not in the form that it's generally painted to be.
I think you don't like to swear. That's what I'm picking up on. Okay, that's fine. Sea serpents.
It's not something I have any knowledge of, and I just don't believe in things that I don't have any knowledge of.
It's okay. This is just a Rorschach test. It's fine. Just say bullshit or believe it. No one's gonna hold you to this, except for me and Bryce. Sea serpents. Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Poltergeists.
Believe.
Chupacabra.
Believe.
Atlantis.
Believe.
Life on other planets.
Believe.
Parallel dimensions.
Believe.
The apocalypse.
No.
Life after death.
Believe.
Oh, believe it? You're done.
That was
fantastic.
Amazing. Well done.
Bryce, I think I understand why you guys are friends, because he came down heavy on the believe it. Which reminds me, how did you guys meet?
That's a great question. We
made a film together.
We did a film together called Harry and Max, and it was I came into audition for Chris's script, and that was it. That was set in stone. When did we shoot that? And was that 2005?
It was
2004.
2003 we shot it. Came out in 2004, and it was my favorite filmmaking experience of all time. In all honesty, it was just a joy. I mean,
oh man,
yeah, it was.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
That's weird. You haven't put him in any of your other movies.
Well, my problem is I make so few films that, as much as I'd like to work with people I know and love and have worked with before and hold in high esteem, oftentimes I don't, have a part, or maybe 30 years later I'll have a part.
You could have played the guy in like The Checkpoint who let Campbell Scott into his father's neighborhood.
Oh, the guy at the country club. No denim?
The country club. He could have been a country club guy.
Chris, that was one of my favorite filming experiences too. And and it's been fun going on this journey with Chris, just like being able to, like, when I found out he was doing a film about, Sasquatch, it was on. And then boy, when he told me he was writing a script about sort of president's involvement in extraterrestrials, I was kind of just like, wow.
He has been talking about this movie for a couple of years now. He's been very excited.
I'm very excited.
Before we move on, I just want to say, Chupacabra, you were a firm believe it, and I appreciate that, because most people go, what?
Well, it's only belief, though. It's not based on firsthand experience. I mean, many of the subjects that you posed to me, when I say believe, it was not belief. It was knowing the reality of it. But you had only a believe or not believe response possible. So I had to say believe. But I don't like believing in things. I like knowing that something is real.
Belief
John
is the
Keel,
enemy, John Keel said.
Settle down, John Keel. All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk all about this movie and the story of high strangeness that inspired it. We'll be back in just a moment. All right, we're back with filmmaker Christopher Munch. Chris, Bryce, you guys, Bryce, you've been excited about this movie, The 11th Green, since we started this podcast. Let's talk about the movie, but maybe to set it up, let's talk about the story that inspired it. And I can pass that off to either one of you guys.
Chris, go ahead.
Sure. Well, as both of you probably know, there's been a kind of urban legend around since the 1950s that on one or more occasions, Dwight David Eisenhower met with representatives of extraterrestrial races. And the origin of this story seems to have been the mystic and lecturer Gerald Light, who was really kind of a fascinating character. Supposedly, I think he studied with Gurdjieff, and he lectured around Southern California a lot. But he was writing a letter to the person I believe who was publishing his work, who Mead Lane, who I believe was at the Borderland Sciences Foundation. In any case, the origin of that story seems to have been there, that Eisenhower was on a hunting trip at one of his cabinet members' lodge in Georgia, and that he disappeared. And the cover story was that he had to have dental work done at night. And supposedly he...
In the woods?
Supposedly he flew up to Muroc Field, now known as Edwards Air Force Base in California, and had an encounter or a meeting with a visitor from another world. There was another...
Mr. President, your third molar is ready.
Exactly. And then a year or so later, supposedly there was another meeting that took place at Holloman Air Base, but much earlier than the alleged footage that Emenegger was being offered in 1955 or so. And the researcher Art Campbell actually wrote extensively about this and dug up people who were alleged eyewitnesses even to Eisenhower's visit to the base that day. So
the meeting that took place between Eisenhower and these entities was about what?
Well, it was about the idea that we had come into the possession of certain technology by way of crashed objects, and it was an offer of guidance of how to utilize this constructively, which was apparently rejected because we felt... Actually, if I may, would you like me to read you a short paragraph, a short description of what happened from a mediumistic source?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. But this folklore, has been around. One of the interesting aspects, I believe, of the visit to Holloman is that a couple of the members of his party on his plane on Columbine 3, Lockheed Super Constellation, which was his Air Force One, was that Arthur Godfrey was there as who was involved in the continuity of government plans, and who apparently, along with people like Edward R. Murrow, were charged with pre-recording soothing messages.
Oh, no way.
To play over the radio.
The golden disc of Edward R. Murrow.
Soothing messages to play in the event of nuclear Armageddon. So,
whoa!
Oh, wow! Oh, I see. Oh my God, that's crazy.
Arthur Godfrey was on this trip to Holloman. In any case, something else I came across recently. There are a couple of mediumistic sources that talk about Eisenhower having met with aliens. One of them is the raw material, the book, or The Law of One, it was called. But it's a fascinating body of work. I was never able to penetrate it when I was younger because the syntax is so dense, and it's
all these occult writings, anything that stuff is so tough to really read that I need someone who's personable and smart to just tell me about it, basically, because I can't crack that stuff. That stuff is hard.
It really is. I tried to get through the emerald tablets of Thoth, and you're just like, wow, okay.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and as crazy as all this channel material is, it somehow, some way seems to always be involved in the changing of history. So, as crazy as this is, there's always profound things that take place after the fact. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the Raw group, Don Elkins, who was the questioner for all of this material, and Elkins was a very interesting character. He was an engineer and a pilot who, in the 1960s, set out to make mediumistic contact with extraterrestrial visitors by training students in an academic environment to do this, and they produced some really interesting material. He wrote a book in the 70s called Secrets of the UFO that contained transcripts of a lot of this material, and you can buy the recordings as well, or the recording that he compiled of some of this information. But in any case, in session 24, February 15th, 1981, he asks, one thing that's been bothering me, I was just reading about, is not too important, but I would be really interested in knowing if Dwight Eisenhower met with either the Confederation or the Orion Group in the 1950s. And Ra replies, I am Ra. The one of which you speak met with thought forms which were
Just to clarify, I'm Ra.
Yeah, okay. Thought forms which are indistinguishable from third density. This was a test. We, the Confederation, wished to see what would occur if this extremely positively oriented and simple congenial person with no significant distortion towards power happened across peaceful information and the possibilities which might append therefrom. We discovered that this entity did not feel that those under his care could deal with the concepts of other beings and other philosophies. Thus, an agreement reached then allowed him to go his way, ourselves to do likewise, and a very quiet campaign, as we have heard you call it, be continued alerting your peoples to our presence gradually. Events have overtaken this plan. So the last sentence,
that's wild.
The last sentence is a little ominous. Events have overtaken this plan, but I believe that indeed that's what happened. You know, there was a big delay in the information becoming public.
The information being what exactly?
The existence of these other beings and philosophies. Yeah.
And who are, according to this medium, who are the Confederation and who are the Orion Group? What are those two conglomerates?
Well, I believe they they had postulated that the Confederation were a confederation of, I guess, more positively oriented consciousnesses, some of whom were visiting. But Ra themselves, that group, I believe, stated that they were physiologically present, on our world in pre-dynastic Egypt, and that the reason that they returned in this particular fashion and communicated in a more mediumistic fashion is because they saw the errors of their ways and the way in which they, had been regarded as gods or placed in that category in such a way that it wasn't beneficial in the way they had hoped, to pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization. So they were staying back, at least as far as being, physically present.
Well, and what I love about your movie is you sort of frame it in the in the role of this guy, played wonderful by Campbell Scott, a guy named who's sort of an investigative reporter, and whose father happens to be a retired Air Force general of Eisenhower, who passed away, and it's sort of that kicks off the whole movie as he's going to sort of first of all, deal with his father's affairs and sort of which directly sort of connect to what his interests are in these covert energies used to sort of move into the commercial world, like you were talking about that article. So it's a great way to kick off the film, I think.
Well, yeah, and he's reporting on this story at the time of this fictional aerospace company who's attempting to migrate this, and that fascinated me. What would happen if a company did that, and if a
company, in other words, using retro technology taken from a UFO and putting it into an airplane, commercial airplane. Was it a commercial airplane in the film? Forgive me, or what? I can't remember. Was it a military plane?
Well, that's the thing. The story proposes that this technology existed in the black world, and that they were attempting to migrate it into a commercial product that would benefit humanity.
That's what I thought. And by black world, we're talking about the black book, like military technology, like the secret shit that they're building in the military.
Yeah, special access programs, black budgets, all that stuff.
Yeah. The type of carved out area of a special access program that was described in Eric Davis's notes about what Admiral Tom Wilson had told him about his inability to access this particular carved out section of a special access program, which he knew about, whose existence he knew about, but which he had been unable to obtain any information about.
Wow.
So how did this movie come about? How did you decide, okay, the next movie I'm going to make is The 11th Green?
I think as a filmmaker, what interested me most was more the emotional what if involving President Eisenhower, and how would this man 10 years or so after his presidency have reflected back on such meetings had they occurred? Would he have had any regrets about not accepting the offer, about insisting that we needed to maintain our military advantage? How would this have weighed on him? And the idea of Eisenhower, who was not really known to have been somebody who looked back a great deal, him being in a place where he was sort of forced to be more introspective and go down this road where he starts having dreams about this representative of another civilization, this ET that he had encountered back in the 50s, this tall blonde,
sort of why can't I think of his name? Thor.
Yeah, exactly. Valiant Thor.
I wanted to say Valiant Thor. Yeah, he's a bit of a Valiant Thor type, a bit of a Venusian type.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which was cool because I always pictured when Eisenhower met with aliens, it would be with the Greys for some reason. I don't know why. I was interested in why you chose to go I guess it's a more peaceful representation of alien life, perhaps, this like Venusian style guy. But like, did that come from research, or did that come from just your artistic liberty wanting to? How did you decide how you wanted to represent alien life in this movie?
I think it was a liberty that I took in consultation with some of my advisors, and it seemed like the best way to go about it, rather than because I think we all have such strong reactions to seeing gray aliens. I mean, not actual gray aliens, but seeing representations.
Listen, I think I saw one time, and my reaction was pretty strong.
Actually, I came across that other mediumistic passage I was going to read to you. Do you want me to read it? It's not long.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's see. They were hybrid beings of a sort, and what was offered to your world was the opportunity, of course, for the revelation of their existence, for interaction between your society and theirs, toward the perpetuation of your society and the guidance of your society in a positive direction. This was turned down for fear that your society would panic and it would upset the balance of your sociological, religious, and economic structures. Now, of course, there were also what you may call ulterior motives to turning them down, based on the idea of certain individuals and families on your planet that have been placed in charge of those institutions and who did not want to see the status quo upset because of their own concepts of what represents power and stability for themselves personally. Nevertheless, it was known at the time that your world had already gotten a hold of extraterrestrial technology from more than one ship that had crashed on your planet, and thus then what was being offered was the ability to guide you in how to utilize this technology in a positive and constructive way for your people. But again, this was turned down because it was felt at the time that what was required was a technological and military advantage over those with whom you were at war. So thus then the idea of interaction was suspended and altered in a different way, although it was understood that certain kinds of interactions would still continue for a variety of purposes that we will not go into too deeply at the moment. So while there was no official interaction, there were unofficial interactions from time to time for a variety of reasons, some of which fit the agenda of the people of your world, some of which fit the agenda of the beings from other worlds.
And do you think, I mean, and just sort of hypothesizing, do you think that these extraterrestrials or these visitors wanted anything in return?
Well, that's a good question, because it's been suggested that, there were treaties made that allowed certain types of abductions, for instance, to take place in exchange for certain types of technology. And I really don't know. I really don't know what that all is about. I don't have enough information to be able to comment on it. I was approaching it for my film from the standpoint that it was a more altruistic type of offer being made on the part of this.
Well, and I think that's a really smart choice, because then it's placed, you really put the moral conundrum on the leader. and deciding on how, the president deciding whether or not they're going to like let the cat out of the bag, which you do with set in present day in the film. There's just a character called the president, but I think we all recognize who that president is. Has a startling resemblance to Barack Obama, which this is the part of the movie, and I don't want to spoil too much, that my mind was blown when Obama came into this movie.
Oh my God. Chris, Michael texted me last night with a picture of Obama putting on the headphones going into his golf meditation. He said, I was not ready for this.
Obama is using a golf app to meditate and make contact with Eisenhower in the past. I mean, this movie is wild, Chris.
Oh, yeah. I have it right here. Obama is time traveling via a golf app. I was not properly prepared for this interview. It's amazing. I was like, yeah, you're in for it, man. Just sit back and enjoy.
Bryce, he's on vacation. He can do whatever he wants.
Oh my God. That was great. I mean, I love that you're just making this like earnest drama about like the biggest, like wildest high strangeness topics there are, which is like extraterrestrial contact, black book operation. Like, I mean, there's like,
and how the leaders of the free world deal with that heavy load,
But I was just like, no one else is making a movie like this.
No one, hands down.
Well, what was appealing about the idea of having two presidents together is that really, it's an entry point into exopolitics that only presidents could give you, and if we accept the idea that these guys don't really have a very full picture, and I kind of do accept that, and I think the line that Ike says in the film, they give you just enough to convince you that the secrecy needs to continue, and often they don't give you the true reasons for the secrecy. I mean, that's pretty interesting stuff, and I mean, there have been presidents, historically speaking, like Jimmy Carter, who went into office professing a desire to declassify as much as possible of that, and then who, after they were in office, also allegedly said that they felt that information had been left from them, or had been withheld from them. So it is very interesting to think about the institution of the American presidency being this kind of exalted office, into which we place all of our aspirations and, all of our highest values, really, and generally speaking, with some exceptions, we expect the person occupying the office to sort of behave in a certain way. But to consider that something this important would not be fully available, to a person in that position is quite intriguing, and that it was set up that way with the understanding that the control of the subject needed to be completely autonomous and needed to be apart from government, and that the government would remain just this sort of figurehead that we generically project all of our frustration onto when it comes to being denied information.
I heard a really fascinating theory when I was in Roswell, actually, from our tour guide, which is this guy named Dennis Balthazar, who's just studied everything Roswell and knows that city backwards and forwards, knows the Roswell crash story up and down. And he was talking about how, in his opinion, the president is a public servant that serves between 4 and 8 years and does not need to know about the existence of ETs. So unless there's a crash that happens on their watch, they're not going to be told about it, which for some reason that theory kind of stuck with me when he told us that on the tour. And I was like, that kind of makes sense, you know, that there's someone in the Pentagon or the military is like, listen, we don't need to tell this person who's here for only, you know, maximum of 8 years that there's we have had crashes and we've recovered bodies. They don't need to know unless they need to know.
Well, that's just the thing. These generals don't come and go; they stay, you know, and these private companies that have access to these funds, these black budget funds, they don't come and go so often either. You know, these are career aeronautics engineers, and these are career military personnel. I mean, so yeah, Chris, you always said, and I thought it was great, the apparatus for compartmentalizing secretive information was formed perfectly after World War II, and I think that's so poignant as well.
Well, it existed during World War II as a result of the bomb project, you know, in the United States, and those national laboratories existed, and the level of security that was needed to contain a project like that existed there. You know, interestingly, the engineer and scientific statesman Vannevar Bush, who was reputed to have been a part of the post-war group that dealt with this, he described in detail in his memoir in the late 60s the way in which he went around Congress and went around the military directly to President Roosevelt to form the OSRD, which came up with a number of technological innovations, but was also the vehicle through which the Manhattan District or the Manhattan Project got underway, you know, to build the bomb. And so you could really imagine in reading this description how similarly a post-war working group that dealt with recovered objects or you know, extraterrestrial contact could have been kept secret and could have been formed in such a way as to be or as to become eventually completely autonomous, so that a president, for instance, would not have any trouble maintaining plausible deniability about that.
Right.
You know, so my feeling is that after the Truman administration, every subsequent president knew very much less and less. Eisenhower still knew a lot because of his previous roles. He was, you know, the supreme Allied commander in Europe, head of Allied expeditionary forces in the war, and then he was the head of NATO, the first head of NATO, and so he had every reason to know a thing or two. And interestingly, there actually was some uncorroborated correspondence released a few years ago from the British National Archives that describes a meeting that he had had with Churchill on the occasion of an alleged contact between an RAF reconnaissance plane and you know, a UFO during the war. And Churchill apparently responded that it was so shocking that it needed to be kept secret for 50 years.
Wow.
which kind of aligns with, you know, the core stories of ufology, you know, as far as humanity's readiness to assimilate this information. But,
wow, what a wild, now fully mythological time in our history. You know,
Yeah.
It really feels like more and more.
seems like it. Yeah, absolutely. And it does seem like things really got increasingly secretized and increasingly secretized and inaccessible. Truly. I mean, it was, I think Ben Rich made the comment that these technologies exist, but they're so far buried within these saps that it would take, I forget what he said, an act of God or something to pry them loose, and that it's easier to reinvent them in the open science than it is to try and migrate them.
He also said we have the ability to take ET home.
Yeah.
Right.
But there was an I don't know if you ever read it, there was an interesting article that Norio Hayakawa, I think, wrote about that, and the fact that he often said that at various presentations.
Sure.
One of the things that I feel like the film plays upon is the idea that some of these secrets can survive within families in a way, you know, and I wonder, do you hold out hope for some deathbed confessions of some sons or daughters or grandkids of some of these old timers that may have passed some of this information along?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, one interesting popularization of this idea was the miniseries Taken, the Steven Spielberg miniseries.
Oh, yeah.
And the fellow who wrote that, Les Bohm, was a real scholar, and the early episodes did I thought a really good job of depicting the aftermath of Roswell. Some of the later episodes became extremely speculative, but one thing that show did very well is dramatize the dynastic nature of the clandestine organization, and indeed the transformation of these successive generations of people charged with upholding the secrets, and the way in which finally one of them, I guess the son of the fellow who was such a hardliner, who chillingly shot his wife in the back when he was concerned that she would reveal something. He said it has to stop. So in that story, in that popularization, it was depicted as being something that changed over time. And yet we have other informants who tell us that families who have been part of the clandestine organization, for a long time, that it does stay with them.
What I love about this is, God, it's so detailed, and it seems like, Chris, you took a journey down the rabbit hole, for lack of a better term. Do you think that you're still in that rabbit hole? Do you think you've come out the other side, or are you still interested in still researching and sort of studying the UFO UAP phenomenon and its implications with exopolitics? Is this something that still interests you, or are you moving on to other subjects now?
No, it still very much interests me, and I certainly am always reading. I think what has changed is that I have become slightly more discerning, so I'm less apt to kind of go down rabbit holes. And there's some types of material that really are rather depressing, and you kind of don't want to dwell too much, in them. You kind of want to take those in very small doses. But absolutely, I find it fascinating, and I still find the whole subject of breakthrough energy technology and free energy, and the idea again of society's organic readiness to assimilate that. Because I am convinced at this point that the reason the technologies have not been appearing is not because of suppression and not because they don't exist, but because of the readiness factor. That interests me hugely.
The movie is called The 11th Green. When and where can our listeners watch it? And what's the final thing you want them to know about the movie?
Well, let's see. The 11th Green now is playing in a theatrical at home run, and it can be found, the easiest way is probably just to go to my website, ChristopherMunch.com, and that has a link directly to the page where you can watch the film. And as far as what I'd like the audience to know, I guess I just would hope that in some way it stimulates their imagination and maybe possibly thinking a little bit outside of whatever preconceptions they might have about the subject, or have been, indoctrinated into over the years through media, through fantasy films, and films that are less than truthful in the way they depict things. But just to come to it with an open mind and consider that there is some factual historical underpinnings to the story, and it could well have happened.
I love it.
I do too, man. I think we're just, to add on top of that, we're so lucky to have a voice like yours representing not only Sasquatch but sort of this UFO UAP topic as well. It's such a grounded and wonderful film, and if you, for those listeners out there, you guys will love it. I recommend to go to Chris's site, to click on the link and watch it. You guys won't regret it. It's truly a one of a kind.
Get
film.
ready, guys. It's gonna blow your mind.
or as Richard Roper would say, take your edible 45 minutes before and then click the link.
I want to thank Chris for joining us. Chris, Bigfoot is found in the woods. But where can our listeners find you? ChristopherMunch.com, you mentioned. And are you on social media?
Yeah, let's see. The 11th Green has social media pages. They can find it on the 11th Green Film on Facebook. They can find it on Antarctic Pictures on Instagram, or actually Instagram, I think, is just Antarctic P, and Twitter is Antarctic Pictures, or the other way around. In any case, it's there, and my website, ChristopherMunch.com, has information about it as well.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
I love it. And I've heard from a little bird that you have a few Bigfoot stories. Is this true?
Well, during the course of making Letters from the Big Man, I had a lot of experiences that were very interesting. I think probably the most interesting ones involved anomalous sounds.
Okay, well, don't go any further.
Hold it right there.
Because we're going to hold ourselves a little after party on the other side right now. As you're done listening to this, you can go over to the other side, and we're going to have a little after party with Chris. We're going to hear some of these Bigfoot stories and maybe talk a little bit about Letters from the Big Man. So join us over there. Follow us on Instagram, Bigfoot Collectors Club, on Twitter at Bigfoot Pod, and merch. If you want t-shirts, head over to wearecampfire.media, click shop, and blast away. Please give me a follow on Instagram at McMills. Bryce is Mr. Bryce Johnson, and Riley is Peace Drone. Personal plugs, new season or a brand new show, Perry Mason. I show up in a couple episodes. Check it out on HBO or HBO Max.
Yeah.
And also the remainder of the episodes of Robot Chicken that I wrote on are airing right now on
Check
Adult
'em out.
Swim. So check that shit out. Bryce, anything to plug?
I'm working on something pretty fascinating. Can't wait to tell you guys all about it. I bet you have your ideas.
Another top secret project. Do us a favor, go over to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review like this one, the best podcast I've ever listened to, by T-Bents. On my third time binging through every episode, and it just gets better and better.
Oh, wow.
The banter is hilarious, the chemistry couldn't be better, and the stories are fascinating and dig deeper than most paranormal podcasts that just hit on the surface level stories and accounts. Also,
Thank you,
the only podcast that I support over on Patreon, because I just can't get enough.
Love
Go.
that.
Listen and join the club. Thank you. If you give us a 5-star review, we might read it on the show. We are going to take a little summer break, as is our tradition. We'll be back with a brand new episode in 2 weeks, but fear not, because next week we're going to give you a little Patreon sampler. So if you're not a member of the other side, it'll be new to you. And if you are a member of the other side, we're going to give you a new drop as well. So everybody gets something new next week. But we'll be back here in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Hopefully Riley will get out of that traffic jam and he'll be back here. Until then,
I was just going to say, if you're not a Patreon member, give us a chance. We're doing all kinds of fun stuff over there. Like we have a movie club, we have a book club, and we have sort of more off the cuff discussions about topics of highest strangeness, where we'll even be continuing our wonderful discussion with filmmaker Christopher Munch about some of his more anomalous Bigfoot encounters. So join us on over there if you haven't already.
it's available right now. Okay.
It's a fun time.
At any rate, until next time we meet, good night.
And go get regressed.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to stop this recording.
Bigfoot Collectors Club is produced by Riley Bray. Our theme song is Come Alone by Suneaters, courtesy of Lotuspool Records. If you like the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the podcast to more listeners. To support the show, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Bigfoot Collectors Club and unlock multiple reward episodes every month.